Chapter 66 The Little Spider's Great Adventure Part 2 In the shield break room, Steve pointed to a diagram on the whiteboard and said, "I've said it before. Tactical proficiency is not just about arranging battle plans in advance, but more importantly, about simultaneously discerning the enemy's intentions and even anticipating their course of action before they do. Your failure in the last battle was partly due to your failure to do this. You chose to climb to the roof first, which is good. Seizing the high ground is indeed very important. However, you made a fatal mistake next. First, you rushed in without checking how many exits this building had. Secondly, when fighting inside a building, we generally do not recommend using high-rise assaults. Once you start driving the enemy from a high place, they will instinctively run downstairs. If there is an exit on the lower level, they can leave the building safely. The correct approach is either to encircle and attack from both above and below, or to launch a layered assault from the bottom up. If you drive the enemy away from the bottom, they can only run upwards and then choose to jump out of the window or get trapped indoors, unable to leave through the ground exits. Do you understand?" Peter sat at the coffee table in front of him, writing as he asked, "But breaking down the door will make a noise. What if they notice? I'm going in through the window to catch them off guard." Your thinking is correct. The most important thing in a raid on a building is speed. As I just said, if you want to drive people out from the bottom up, you must first figure out how many exits the building has, block the exits before you start, and then break in through the windows. In fact, I don't really recommend you use this method. Although you have a unique advantage, the opponent is playing on their home turf, and they have a deeper understanding of the room and building structure than you do. Although you caught them off guard, you've now entered an unfamiliar building. The surrounding environment is completely unfamiliar to you, and if there are any traps in the room, you might not be able to react quickly enough. Peter was about to say that he had a spider sense, but then he thought about it and realized that Steve was right. Although he could see two people in the room when he was hanging on the window, what if there was an ambush at bullseye? What if he smashed a cup and dozens of big men rushed out from nowhere? His spider sense was good at reacting on the spot, but it wasn't a prophecy, and he couldn't see through people. Peter scribbled in his notebook, and Steve continued. "Besides, you already know that your opponent is a cunning villain with multiple burrows. You just said that you think the junkyard is perfect for you to fight him, but don't forget that he's been there much longer than you have. This cunning enemy has definitely already planned out a dozen escape routes in his mind. Even if he doesn't use tear gas on you, if you lose focus for even a moment, he will definitely get away." Peter sighed and said, "I thought my plan was very thorough, but I didn't expect there to be so many mistakes. It seems that I really deserve to lose." Steve walked over, sat down next to him, patted him on the shoulder and said, "That's normal. You're already very talented. You didn't see it back in the army. Those guys weren't even brave enough to do a high-altitude rappelling. They were all trembling with fear on the rooftops, let alone any airborne assault. You were able to do that from the beginning, which is already much better than most of them." Peter put away his notebook and said, "I definitely won't let him get away next time." An hour later, in the Stark Tower laboratory, Stark was holding an antenna and saying, "While the series connection method you used is stable, it completely fails to maximize the antenna's effectiveness. Don't talk to me about raw material limitations. When I was in Afghanistan, didn't I still assemble mechs from a bunch of scrap metal? I could build computers that were way better than yours when I was 6 years old. Furthermore, your understanding of the word intelligent in intelligent crawling systems is too superficial. Do you think that writing an automatic filtering system makes it intelligent? Why don't you try writing a complete artificial intelligence logic?" Stark lowered the power cord, snapped his fingers, and a screen slowly descended from the roof. Pointing to the map on it, Stark said, "Look here. This is Hell's Kitchen, right? It has an overall spindle shape, so your signal coverage doesn't have to be a perfect circle. You can use different frequencies to maximize efficiency, like this. Alternatively, you could find a base, build a simple signal tower there, and use it to monitor the designated Hell's Kitchen signal." Peter thoughtfully pointed the laser pointer at the map of Hell's Kitchen. He said, "I found the central intersection of Hell's Kitchen, which is also the center of the underground sewers I used to travel through. Do you think we could place a signal device there? What method should we use? I think the method we're using now, while stable, is indeed not efficient enough." Several hours later, when it was dark and Schiller was about to close the door, Peter squeezed in through the crack. "I heard your operation is not going well," Schiller said. Seeing Peter nod somewhat dejectedly, Schiller said, Although you have the technology to listen to other people's cell phone signals, I think it's not actually the best way. Indeed, this method is simple, direct, and effective. But the problem is that it is too simple and direct, causing you to overlook many details. Bullseye's trail isn't as untraceable as you think. You just lack a bit of awareness of reconnaissance and counter-reconnaissance. Peter sat down on the sofa, took a sip of water, and Schiller took out his medical record and said, "Do you know where the best informed place in Hell's Kitchen is?" Peter shook his head. "I ask you, what are two things that people cannot escape? Death and taxes?" "That's right. So, what do you think these 2 points correspond to in Hell's Kitchen?" "I haven't heard of a hospital or a tax authority in Hell's Kitchen," Peter said, shaking his head. "You need to know that without any understanding of the rules of Hell's Kitchen, it's almost impossible to successfully combat crime." Peter said, "Well, actually I thought about it last night. I was a bit too impulsive. When I think about what happened to Matt, I just want to beat that guy up right now. Hell's Kitchen certainly doesn't have a proper hospital or management bureau, but after gang fights here, gang members still get injured. After they're injured, are there doctors to treat them? Where do these doctors come from? Who hires them? Do they have any special intelligence? Hell's Kitchen may not have a tax bureau, but with so much protection money collected by the gangs and so many businesses, do you really expect these gang leaders who didn't even finish junior high school to do the math themselves? Where did they hire their accountant? When will they arrive? Which of them knows which gang leader? And did they see the person you're looking for recently? Besides, what about the truck drivers who travel through the streets of Hell's Kitchen every day? What about the taxi and bus drivers? Even if they are gangsters, they still need to eat. Where does Bullseye order his meals? Has he hired a chef recently? Furthermore, has he been to any strip clubs? Or solicited prostitutes? Schiller pointed to the map Peter had opened and said, "It is impossible for a human being to live in this world without leaving a trace. A person living in a society will inevitably interact with other people in that society. Perhaps the kind of investigation you imagine is using a magnifying glass to look for footprints everywhere, or that you can only make a discovery if he leaves some physical trace. But in fact, every person he has met and every word he has said has left a trace, more or less." Schiller shook his head and said, "This Bullseye isn't some kind of counter-surveillance master. If you're willing to put in more patience to investigate these things, you don't even need to fight him. Reconnaissance is not the prelude to battle, but also a dirge for the soul. If one day you can truly master this skill, you will understand that you don't need to waste your energy swinging your fists to deal with these criminals. I'm not referring to petty tricks like using anesthetics or putting drugs in drinks or food. If you can figure out all of a person's social relationships and understand every trace he leaves in society, you can find countless ways to leverage those relationships and achieve great things with minimal investment. You don't need to cut any thread to skillfully untangle all the complicated knots and tie them into the shape you want." Peter didn't scribble in the notebook this time. He said, "I don't really understand these things, but maybe I'll remember them someday when I need them. Actually, I still prefer to punch. I always feel that by the time I resort to those methods, the situation is probably already in a terrible state," Peter said, as the shutter door outside the clinic closed. 2 days later, a man with a target mark on his head was dumped in front of the Manhattan Police Department. On the rooftop of the building across the street, Spider-Man stood watching the police take Bullseye inside. The New York streets were still bustling at dusk. This little incident attracted the attention of many pedestrians, but they quickly lowered their heads and hurried past. "You surprise me." Matt's voice came from behind Spider-Man, holding his cane. "How did you take down Kingpin's biggest informant in Hell's Kitchen in just a few days?" Peter was standing on the edge of the roof when he heard Matt's voice, and he turned around. He took off the hood of his battle suit, and his fluttering hair turned into floating golden threads in the light of the setting sun behind him. He smiled, with the childlike innocence and cheerfulness unique to his age. He said, "That's probably because I'm really good at making friends." Author's note on the launch of Chapter 67. Hello everyone. This book is about to be released. It's been 40 days since I released the first chapter on January 18th, and the book has reached approximately 220,000 words. The first VIP chapter will be released after midnight today. Hooray! Here, the author would like to talk about the process of writing this book. About a year ago, I finished my rapid-fire, high-frequency, gambling-style serialization on another website and decided to write a proper, complete book. Just as I was about to start writing, I realized that due to my long-term pursuit of trending topics, my tendency to cut off anything that wasn't right, and my tendency to write mindless self-deprecating stories, my writing skills had deteriorated drastically, to the point that my mind went completely blank when I had to organize a long story. So, I started a practice piece on another website, a purely slice-of-life story, just to get my writing style back on track. That book was entirely written in isolation. I wrote it for almost a whole year, from February of last year to December of this year, totaling about 1.5 million words. The income it brought me was probably not even in the 4 figures. However, I am still very satisfied because in this book, I practiced a lot of daily writing, foreshadowing and foreshadowing recovery, long-term story organization, and character development, which finally brought my writing back to a normal level. After finishing the outline I had at the time, I started preparing for the next story. The reason I thought of American comics was related to my experience of reading comics when I was a child. When I was in elementary school, there was a small shop across from the school gate that sold all kinds of comic books, teaching materials, and stationery. It was there that I first came into contact with superhero comics. Unlike the popular comics like Jean Comics and Sa Comics that were popular in China at the time, the superhero comics I saw had a more realistic art style and more realistic stories. Over the years that followed, I continued to follow the comic book on and off, and then started watching the spin-off movies and TV series. I think many people, like me, felt something was missing after watching some parts of the story and continued to imagine how the plot would develop. Thus, this American comic book fan fiction came into being. When I first started publishing the book, I didn't research internal submissions or signing contracts at all. I just published it directly because I was purely doing it out of love. I liked these superheroes and wanted to continue their stories, so I wrote it very casually at the beginning. On January 23rd, 5 days after the book was published, I received a text message informing me of the contract signing, and I signed the contract that same day. At this point, I began to consider the commercial value of the book and started to develop an overall outline and some key scenes. This is why some people say that the writing style is somewhat inconsistent and the settings are conflicting, because when the book was first published it was just a rough draft, and the outline only came into existence after about 30,000 words. After that, I didn't expect the book to do very well, because those of you who have read it should have noticed that this book is quite different from most of the pretentious face-slapping stories. This book is themed around character prequels of superheroes, focusing on character development. Its writing structure mainly imitates American TV series, and its writing style is based on cinematic and scene-by-scene techniques. Compared to online novels, it is more like an episodic drama in both structure and style. Therefore, I'm prepared to play offline for another year. Surprisingly, quite a few people also liked this structure and technique. When the book reached around 110,000 words, Qidian's intelligent recommendation system kicked in, and the book gained more than 3,000 favorites in one day. Since then, the number of new favorites has never fallen below 1,000. I remember before, I posted an author's note saying that the book's performance wasn't very good and it might not be able to advance in the recommendation process. But since then, thanks to the support of all the readers, all my recommendations have been overwhelmingly #1. And on February 13th, just 15 days after its release, it topped the Qidian Light Novel section's new book chart. Then, on February 14th, it topped the Qidian New Book ranking. Furthermore, this book remained at the top of the overall list until February 23rd, meaning it stayed on the Qidian New Books overall list for a full 9 days, with several level 5 authors and even some top-tier authors ranking below it. For a newcomer who has only had an account for less than 2 months, this achievement is truly remarkable. This is all thanks to every reader. Every read, every ticket, every tip, and every comment you made contributed allowed a fanfiction of an American comic to stay at the top of the new book charts for 9 days, and allowed more people to see the stories of the characters and superheroes created by the author in this book. As of today, the book has garnered 50,000 favorites, and has been featured on the top recommended webpage category, the homepage's newest book section, and the announcement board. Yesterday, it was also featured on Qidian's Sanjiang channel. To date, this book has received every good recommendation a new book can get, and the author must give extra thanks to a few people. First, there's my editor, Peng Lai. This book, which was originally published directly, was picked up by my editor before it was able to be seen by everyone. Moreover, the smooth progress after the 100,000 word mark is also inseparable from Peng Lai's guidance. Secondly, I am very grateful to my first and second patrons, Eon Fei and Gongzi Qianji, for their generous donations. I would also like to give special thanks to 2 authors who were writing at the same time, Zoki, the author of I Accidentally Bumped into a Witch While Flying on a Sword, which I recommended before, and Hener Zue, the author of My Female Disciples All Want to Kill Me, These two provided me with a lot of help when I was like an old man trying to understand Chidian's complicated recommendation mechanism. Therefore, I would also like to recommend their books. If you are interested, you can check them out. Both of them are slice-of-life stories with very interesting plots. Other books I'd like to recommend include One Piece, starting with Demi-Human Bloodline, Madara Uchiha's Interdimensional Travels. One Piece, with pay in place, the 4 emperors are kicked down. Bright Sword, the independent regiment under temporary management has become a special forces unit. Twin Cities, I build mechs in Piltover. Funeral at the start, the Ultra Brothers come to see him off. The Vongala family in the Marvel Comics world. Don't make a fuss. I just want to be a quiet craftsman. In the Mood for Love begins in a courtyard house. The spiritual energy I received from worship. My dimensional life simulator. My girlfriend is my sister's best friend. I became an NPC in a bizarre world. The bizarre adventure of a useless person. Portable mechanical planet. Simulated cultivation. I can foresee the future. I can melt everything. Fellow Taoist, your sword is truly amazing. The righteous me actually became an extraterrestrial demon. Max level comprehension. 60 years of observing swords in Jiangu. In addition, I was planning to update 10,000 words a day after it goes on sale, at least 10,000 words a day a week, and up to a month. I would give an extra chapter to each alliance leader, and then the other alliance leaders and others would also get extra chapters. I will explain the details after I update. Most importantly, First Order. The first VIP chapter will be released at midnight tonight. I hope everyone can subscribe. This is really, really important to me. I want impressive first-day order numbers. This would be one of the most important achievements of my life. Please help me, everyone. Chapter 68, The Black Sun and the Bat Lamp, Part 1. On a dull and unwelcome morning in Gotham City, students at Gotham University faced their psychology final exams. When Evans handed out the papers, a cacophony of howls erupted in the classroom. Then, the sound of leather shoes clicking on the marble floor came from outside the door, and in an instant, the classroom fell silent. Schiller packed his umbrella as he walked into the classroom. Seeing everyone engrossed in writing, he nodded in satisfaction. Then he placed the umbrella on the ground, put his hand on the handle, stood in the center of the classroom and said, "The exam will last 1 hour and 40 minutes. Theoretically, you can hand in your papers early, but I'm bored proctoring here. I will definitely grade your papers in advance. At the very least, you have to make sure you write something that I can read until you walk out of this classroom. Also, although I didn't ask you to sit separately, it's best not to whisper to each other. Please write your answers neatly and do not use fancy fonts. Most importantly, please make sure to write your name clearly. I mean your legal name. Don't make me repeat the same thing I did during the first week of school, emphasizing not to use nicknames. All right, let's start answering the questions." Then the entire classroom fell completely silent, with only the scratching sound of pens moving across the paper. No classroom at Gotham University has ever had such a strong academic atmosphere. Bruce glanced up between pens and saw that sitting to his right was the East Side Hyena's nephew. This guy was a complete bad boy who smoked, drank, and fought since he was just over 10 years old. But he was sitting in his seat, and 10 minutes had passed, and he was still engrossed in writing. Or rather, his brain, filled with alcohol and tobacco, was still able to keep him writing. Sitting to Bruce's left is Gotham University's famous graffiti artist. He's skilled at spray painting and often makes a mess of walls. He even sprayed a graffiti mocking his face onto the walls of the principal's office corridor when Selden was enforcing the campus alcohol ban. He's almost there. He can't even finish the first essay question and is currently drawing various patterns on the exam paper. Bruce glanced at it with his good eyesight and realized that he had drawn Sheila. However, unlike those spoof doodles, Sheila in his painting was facing away from a black sun, with his arms outstretched and some particle-like patterns surrounding him. The whole picture looked strange but cool. He just didn't know if Sheila would be willing to give him 2 extra points because of his careful creation. Half an hour later, more than 2/3 of the people were still writing, which was nothing short of a miracle at Gotham University. In the past, during final exams, a few troublemakers would simply skip the exam so the seats would never be full. 2 minutes into the exam, someone would write their name, stand up, and leave. 10 minutes into the exam, many people will guess all the easy multiple-choice questions, throw down their pens, hand in their papers early, and leave immediately. In the past, after 20 minutes, there would be only a few people left in the classroom. Even those who stayed were not there to work on essay questions. They just took advantage of the quietness of the classroom to sleep. But now, Bruce looked up at his watch and saw that 40 minutes had passed, and half of the people were still writing. No one dared to hand in their papers early. Even though most of them had racked their brains and were on the verge of exhaustion, most of them still sat in their seats, biting their pens, hoping that their limited brains could squeeze out a few more words to write on the papers, trying to make the professor less angry when he saw their answers, which were somewhere between illiterate and semi-literate. In fact, even introductory psychology textbooks contain many difficult terms, names, theories, and definitions. Not to mention those Gotham University students who are used to being lazy and ignorant. Even students from those prestigious American universities must prepare in advance before a special lecture, otherwise they are likely to find themselves in the embarrassing situation of having a blank mind. Memorizing is difficult enough for students whose brains haven't been working for a long time, let alone cramming for 1 or 2 weeks. An hour later, most people had stopped writing. Bruce jotted down the names of those who were still writing diligently on his draft paper. These people would be the backbone of the psychology club he would eventually form. He thought about it and decided to write down the graffiti artist's name, since the club always needed an artist for publicity. After waiting for a full hour and 40 minutes, when the professor sitting in front uttered the word, "Collect the papers," and slammed it heavily onto the floor, a chorus of exasperation filled the classroom. Clearly, they were all about to burst from holding their breath. Even after all the papers were collected, no one dared to leave. It wasn't until Schiller had stapled all the papers together, counted them, checked the names, and then left the classroom with a stack of papers that the classroom exploded like a bomb. "Oh no, I don't know how to do most of the fill-in-the-blank questions. I'm doomed. Damn it. I crammed the psychology definitions last night, but I still didn't get on the test? I shouldn't have wasted so much time on that. I wrote the answer to the second essay question on the fourth one. Oh no, what am I going to do? I'm sure I won't get any points on the essay question. Who among you wrote your graduate school applications? Evans, did you? Yesterday my dad told me that if I'm brainy enough to go to graduate school, I might as well hope our dog can climb trees. But our dog is a corgi. I still owe 2 papers, and I have to finish them before the holidays. Otherwise, I'll be living in fear this holiday and won't be able to have any fun. A group of people huddled around Bruce's table. They were the first group members Bruce had invited. Rennie, the graffiti kid wearing a fluorescent yellow headband, said, "The professor will like my paintings. I can tell he's an artistic person. But he might prefer to see your correct answer," Bruce said. "Come on. I know nothing about this. Memorizing would just pollute my brain." René touched his nose. He was a typical Germanic with green eyes and a few freckles, and dressed in reggae-style clothes. "And who says that's not the correct answer? Who says you have to write to answer a question? Drawing is the same. I'll pass." "Okay. I'll pay you to draw a poster for me. It needs to be big and impactful to promote this club. Name your price, but I want it to be truly shocking," Bruce said. Rennie snapped his fingers and said, "Hey, you've come to the right person. Nobody in all of Gotham knows how to move people better than me." Several people huddled together and whispered among themselves. "What? You mean you want to? You're a genius. Count me in. I want to join too. This is a big surprise. Yes, I knew it would work. Maybe he'll give us a passing grade out of consideration for this." A few days later, Schiller was grading papers while building up his anger. Although he had long expected the level of these good-for-nothing students at Gotham University, he still didn't expect them to do so badly. Not wanting his brain to continue being polluted by this academic garbage, Schiller decided to work overtime today, finish grading all the papers in one go, and then give most of them a failing grade. Suddenly, he heard a sharp screech outside the office building window, somewhat like a fire siren, but shorter and sharper. Schiller stood up and looked out the window. He noticed some lights flickering. It was only just getting dark, and the streetlights were far from being turned on. Most of the teachers and students had not yet left the school. He heard a commotion downstairs, and it seemed someone was calling his surname. Schiller put down his pen, left his desk, and went to the window. The entire side of the building opposite was covered by a huge curtain. Schiller had heard from others that it was for wall renovation. He didn't often walk that way, so he didn't pay much attention to it. But as soon as he reached the window, the curtain on the opposite wall suddenly fell down. There seemed to be a huge graffiti on it, as tall as a 7-story building. A row of spotlights suddenly turned on, illuminating the entire side of the building as bright as day. It was indeed a huge graffiti, with Schiller's silhouette at the bottom and a black sun covered in countless strange patterns at the top. Around the sun were several rings of flames made up of golden patterns, and Schiller's figure stood in front of the black sun. Schiller's figure was almost blended into the background of the black sun, or perhaps the enormous sun was his shadow. Schiller stood by the window. He was first blinded by the high-powered spotlight, and when he opened his eyes, he saw this scene. Schiller, symbiote. Wow! The side of the graffiti reads, "Join the psychology club, confront the human heart, confront this black sun. Blue Ghost Renee." Schiller looked down and saw a group of people standing at the bottom of the building waving excitedly at him. They were most of the psychology students at Gotham University, including Bruce Wayne. Schiller looked up again at the black sun composed of countless bizarre patterns. It was filled with a strange and terrifying aesthetic that made it impossible to look away, as if one's soul was being sucked into it. Horrifying, eerie, bizarre, and absurd. Yet it is also filled with a beauty that draws you in and makes it impossible to escape. Schiller recalled that Gotham originally meant Fool's Village, and it was indeed full of all sorts of absurd fools, whose birth and death were unknown. But at the same time, this place is also full of geniuses who possess unparalleled talent and a captivating vitality. Schiller was indeed somewhat fascinated by this bold and bizarre absurd act, which was full of a special vitality that could not be found anywhere else in the world, like a terrifying vine climbing up from a bottomless abyss, or like a top work of art that rivals countless masters. Schiller knew more than his students, but he had just realized that there was one thing he hadn't yet learned. Indeed, he hasn't learned Gotham yet. Everyone living here is crazy, yet also lucid. This dark city doesn't need anyone to correct it. They live so madly in the abyss, embodying a twisted and eerie vitality. This vitality grows from the darkness. The people here wield madness as a blade, so accurately piercing the heart of anyone. Schiller stared intently at the black sun. He thought, perhaps, everyone here is an unparalleled genius, and the only fool is himself and everyone outside the comics who tries to act as a savior. The people here, with no knowledge of psychological theory whatsoever, saw through their professors as if they were reading minds. A black sun is still a sun. This is an incredibly accurate description of Schiller. Schiller's embodiment is indeed not the blazing sun, but a sun that neither shines nor heats, a black sun. A few minutes later, Schiller wrote a line on the fogged glass with his finger. "You passed." In an instant, a deafening cheer erupted downstairs. Under the black sun, it was as if the people under the illumination of this eternally unlit star were celebrating the new life. Chapter 69, The Black Sun and the Bat Lamp, Part 2. During the winter break, Gotham University's faculty and doctoral student apartments remained open, and most labs continued to operate. Schiller only had the Gotham University faculty apartment in the entire city and no other housing. Therefore, when the break was announced, he had nowhere to go and continued to stay in his office at the university writing his thesis. His grades in the Gotham University Psychology Department exams weren't ideal, which meant his evaluation score wouldn't be high, so he needed to publish more articles to improve the score for this part of his resume. Most students at Gotham University are idle and undisciplined, and most of them live locally. Gotham is not very big, and most students are in a state of being available whenever needed. Bruce took advantage of the break to organize a psychology club. He seemed quite enthusiastic about it, which was understandable, since he needed to pretend that his exam scores were only barely average. However, he was eager to learn some skills from Schiller, so using his money to organize a club was a good choice. That day, Bruce was carrying the materials for the club's preparations, intending to deliver them to Schiller. He stood at the door of Schiller's office, and before he could even knock, he heard the sound of a phone call coming from inside. "Have you considered a lobotomy? Inhumane? Is letting him run wild all over the hospital considered humane? How's Mrs. Adela? Still refusing to wear a straitjacket? How about this? I'll introduce you to a few female gangsters on Mary Street. Have them work as nurses there, and it'll be settled in no time. That Northman is also refusing treatment and not taking his medication. I've seen his medical records before. He has a grudge against the local gang. I'll call their boss later and have him give him a piece of his mind. He'll definitely cooperate then. Never mind those drunks. Alcohol will tell them whether they're sick or not. Someone's coming to sell alcohol? Vodka delivering drugs? I remember your Douglas used to work for Gotham's biggest liquor company. Have him write a letter to his former boss's mansion saying that the Godfather told him to stop selling alcohol to mental hospitals. Aren't those people crazy enough already? That patient at the end of Deer Street, he's in a dispute over inheritance. You don't need to get involved in this mess. Let them resolve it themselves. We take in crazy people here, but not poor bastards full of bad intentions. I'll take my students with me tomorrow. Just hang in there for one more day. What? No, your worries are a bit unnecessary. One of the students I'm taking is the son of the Godfather of Gotham, and the other. Just then, the door opened by itself. Schiller turned around and saw Bruce standing in the doorway. He said, "The other one is the world's richest man." After listening to the phone call, Bruce really wanted to say that he shouldn't go. Professor Schiller sounds exactly like a mad quack doctor. After hanging up the phone, Schiller saw Bruce standing there in a daze and said, "Come in. I've offered you a good internship opportunity, considering how well you've managed the club." Bruce pursed his lips, then opened his mouth, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Your treatment style is quite different from what I imagined. What do you envision? Like giving a lecture to patients, telling them all the psychology knowledge written in textbooks? Isn't that right? Or at least it shouldn't be. At the very least, it shouldn't be about calling the mob and letting them threaten you, right?" Bruce thought, is this psychotherapy? This is more like physical therapy. Schiller shook his head and said, "Criminal psychology is a type of applied psychology. The focus of applied psychology is on application, not psychology. If this were in Metropolis, I might try to talk to them properly, but this is Gotham. A large portion of the patients in Arkham Asylum were forcibly sent in after losing gang wars. What about the other half? Alcoholics who have ruined their brains, drug addicts who have become delirious from drug use, and people who come here to escape revenge killings. Is there not a single mental patient among them?" Schiller, hands on his hips, tapped the table and said, "Why build a smaller mental hospital, specifically to house mental patients when there's already a large one?" Bruce wanted to answer, but after thinking about it carefully, he realized that what Schiller said made a lot of sense. Gotham, this godforsaken place, didn't need a mental hospital at all. Everyone here was mentally ill. There were hardly any normal people. And what can I do? Cure mental illness? Make them positive, optimistic, and kind, normal people? They can just be sent straight to the crematorium after being discharged, since they won't live more than 3 days anyway. Bruce asked, "How is Jonathan?" "Go see him yourself tomorrow," Schiller said. Bruce sat down opposite him and said, "I've been thinking about that suggestion a lot lately, and I think I do need a solid base. It should be a complex that combines a prison, warehouses, monitoring rooms, and laboratories. Furthermore, I plan to build a comprehensive surveillance system to cover the entire city of Gotham. And Rennie gave me some inspiration before, and I think I can also design a special pattern for myself so that people know who I am and who they should turn to. Have you thought it through?" "Bat, of course it's a bat. I know it's a bat. What I'm asking is, are you really sure you want to fight this city to the death?" Schiller tapped the table with the tip of his pen and said, "You still have room to retreat now. Batman is just an eccentric vigilante. But once you start to take full control of the city and give everyone the opportunity to call on you to fight crime, then you will have no way out. When people know that there is a mysterious and powerful hero they can summon at will, one day they will take it for granted and consider it a part of their lives. You will also get involved in some unimaginable troubles, and by then, even if you want to get rid of it, it will be impossible." Bruce said, "I think I'm ready, but now I'm wondering if I'm capable of doing it." Schiller straightened up and began tidying up the documents on the table, saying as he did so, "Of course you have it, and you're capable of more than just this. Why do you always seem to have so much confidence in me?" "Because you are Batman." After saying that, Schiller stood up and left. The next day, Schiller and Bruce set off from Gotham University and drove to Arkham Asylum. Evans was originally supposed to come to the school to meet them first, but there were some issues with Falcone's business that his son needed to handle, so he had to start his internship 2 days later. As a result, only Schiller and Bruce were left. Taking Batman to Arkham Asylum for an internship sounds rather strange, but in fact, Arkham Asylum at this time was not the madhouse that later produced so many talented people. As Schiller said before, most of the people in Arkham at this time were not really mentally ill. As a result, the original attending physician, Brand, was almost driven mad. He was Schiller's old classmate and had only arrived 2 months earlier than Schiller. In his words, his experience working at Arkham Psychiatric Hospital was the biggest hurdle in his life. Schiller was driving while thinking about what Brand had told him about the current situation in the mental hospital. He hadn't driven far from the university when he got stuck in traffic. It took Schiller almost half an hour to drive on a straight road less than 200 meters long. He thought New York was congested enough, but he didn't expect Gotham to be even worse during rush hour. The basic traffic rule in Gotham is that life and death are left to fate and wealth are left to chance. Most people here drive with the attitude that cars are valuable but lives are not. The only purpose of traffic lights here is to provide entertainment for people stuck in traffic, and traffic signs are only used to be kicked when people have road rage. Since Schiller previously worked and lived within the Gotham University campus and mostly walked around, he had never driven on the streets of Gotham during rush hour. When the car drove through the straight lane and entered the roundabout, one wave of cars passed by, but Schiller did not move. Another wave of cars passed by, but Schiller still did not move. After all the cars on the roundabout had gone around once, Schiller still did not move. Professor, when do you plan to go? I'm clicking on the indicator light. Can't you see? But Bruce was momentarily speechless. Aren't you familiar with Gotham's traffic rules? He said. Of course not. I just finished reading the Metropolitan Driver's Manual yesterday. But that's in the metropolis. Gotham doesn't have that kind of thing. Have you ever thought about this? Schiller slammed on the gas and twisted the steering wheel sharply. It's because it's not here that the traffic is this terrible. Bruce touched his ear and shifted his body to the side. In the end, they gave up on driving, climbed the tallest building in the vicinity, and then took Wayne's helicopter over. When they arrived at the mental hospital, Brand came out to greet them. He was a somewhat chubby doctor who seemed to have a good temper and was always smiling, but he looked a little haggard now. When he saw Schiller, he gave him a warm hug, and then shook hands with Bruce. He said, "You've come very early. I thought it would be afternoon. We left this morning. That's why I thought you might be stuck here until the afternoon. But I didn't expect it to be so quick," he said to Schiller as they walked. "Your advice has been a great help. I feel like I'm here not for treatment, but to judge a case. How are the patients?" "A patient? Oh, a patient," Brand said. "Patients who can down 2 bottles of whiskey and smoke a whole pack of cigarettes after taking their medication are incredibly healthy. The other night, they were even betting on when I would quit in the basement storeroom." Schiller patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry about it. That's just how Gotham is." Brand gave a wry smile and said, "If I had any other choice, I wouldn't have come here. Am I the same?" Brand shook his head and said, "We're not the same. I'm hiding from my enemies and you are too, but actually, if you didn't..." He glanced at Bruce and then fell silent. Bruce's curiosity was immediately piqued. It seemed that Dr. Brand knew something about Professor Schiller's past. "All right, let's get to work," Schiller said. Brand pushed open the door to his office and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to make do with my office. The facilities in this hospital are rather old, but this is one of the better ones. The main problem now is that since the new police chief took office, many of the prisoners he tries need psychiatric evaluation certificates, and many others are planning to book beds here directly. There are too many people coming, and their backgrounds are too diverse. The doctors and nurses here are overwhelmed." Brand gave a grim look and said, "You know, those guys have a ton of trouble. This week, the hospital windows have been smashed 18 times, at least a dozen different assassins have gotten in, and 4 people have died, including one unfortunate security guard. Not to mention those people who are desperately smuggling marijuana and strong liquor in there. The situation doesn't look good, but it's okay. I have a whole winter break to spend here, and things will eventually improve," Schiller said. Bruce felt a chill run down his spine. Chapter 70, The Black Sun and the Bat Lamp, Part 2. "Hello? Please transfer me to His Majesty the Godfather. Thank you." "Good afternoon, Godfather. I'd like to discuss a business deal with you." In his office at Arkham Asylum, Schiller put down the phone, tugged at the cord, blew the dust off the receiver, poured himself a drink, picked up the old-fashioned phone, dialed and said, "Hello? Brand? You're in Hawaii?" "No. Don't worry. Enjoy your vacation. I've got it covered." After a while, Bruce came in and placed a stack of documents in front of Schiller. Schiller said, "It's time to go home. Want a drink?" "Thank you, I don't drink. You look a little tired. After all, I haven't slept for almost 50 hours. Of course, that giant bat spotlight you just built has been on all the time lately, so the whole of Gotham knows there's a Batman now. But..." Bruce sighed, hesitated for a moment and said, "I'll have a drink, please. What could make Batman drown his sorrows in alcohol?" Bruce said, "I don't think I should have done that. Bats don't turn on lights, and they shouldn't. Before Schiller could ask, Bruce said, I set up 6 bat-shaped lighthouses throughout Gotham. In the past few days, they lit up a total of 25 times, 19 of which were pranks. So I designed insurance for them, and then I received 12 requests for help, all of which were gang fights, asking me to back them up. I didn't allow the gangs to use them, so they went on a rampage of sabotage. Of course, I designed security procedures which worked quite well. Poor people and beggars would press them, and then the next day they would be killed by the gangs. Bruce covered his face, took a deep breath, and then took a sip of his drink. He swallowed the liquid with difficulty and said, Those who are beyond saving will not be saved. If this is Gotham, I have to say, well, I was too naive. I knew it. No bats light lamps, Bruce said finally. I suggest you take a few days off. When you encounter a problem, you sacrifice your rest time to solve it, and then you encounter a new problem and continue doing the same thing. It's a vicious cycle and you have to stop. It's not helpful at all. Bruce said wearily, Okay, I'm going back to sleep. I'll come to work tomorrow, photocopy medical records, answer the phone, do rounds, anything is fine. The next day, Bruce arrived at work on time as he had said. Schiller was already sitting in his office, drinking a steaming cup of coffee. Bruce also made himself an Americano and started reading a paper. After a while, a female nurse knocked on the door and came in, saying, Doctor, Andre in room 5 on the 2nd floor has been making a fuss. He keeps demanding that the nurses increase the dosage of morphine and analgesia, or he will complain about us. Schiller didn't even look up and said calmly, Give it to him, 3 times the market price, or 5 times if he argues any further. Bruce nearly choked on his coffee. Bird on the 3rd floor wants us to prescribe him headache medicine. He was making a fuss all night last night. Tell him that the pill seller fell off the railing yesterday, landing headfirst, and that he has no stock right now. That guy in ward number 6. Schiller flipped through the file and said, Hall or Gore? Do you have some connections? Have him send someone in, we'll give him 70% and him 30%. After the nurse left, before Bruce could speak, the phone rang again. Schiller picked up the phone while looking at the file. Hello? The whiskey supply is cut off. Right, the last bottle is with me. Who said they had access to a bar the other day? Let me see. Number 1 on the 4th floor. Have him pull some strings from the bar and tell him not to try to fool me with diluted whiskey, or I'll give him a diagnosis recommending permanent treatment. Schiller hung up the phone, then picked up the receiver again, dialed, and said into the phone, Tell them that assassins are not allowed in. They need a gate pass to get in, which costs $100,000 each. The inpatient ward gate costs $50,000, and there's an additional $30,000 wear and tear fee for floors above the 3rd floor. Buying the full package also includes a security patrol map. Hello? The equipment department said yesterday that the EEG machine was broken. Who works for person number 2 on the 5th floor? Old band from the East District? Donate a machine and let him take the person away. He can come over later to get rehabilitation advice. After hanging up the phone, Bruce said, Professor. Before he could finish speaking, the phone rang again. Schiller answered and said, Hello? Didn't you reach an agreement? Tell him that the twin brothers in the South are asking for $500,000, and it's not a buyout. If he doesn't agree, he can forget about getting a single penny from the liquor business here. Hello? No, the Falcone family is now in charge of security at Arkham Asylum. If he wants to force his way in, let him come. The Godfather sends his regards. Just as Schiller hung up the phone, Bruce seized the opportunity and said, Isn't there something wrong with this? Hello? How many people tomorrow? No way, that little vulture can't be squeezed out of him. He's nowhere near as good as his father. Send him to jail, I don't take junk here. He got his hands on his father's business? Fine. Leave room number 7 on the 2nd floor for him. What? A diagnosis? That's a different price. Drag the remaining 3 to next month. Let the judge find some excuse, like diarrhea or something. There are no seats left on the 5th floor. And there's a policeman? A corrupt cop? Was he discovered? We take in the mentally ill, not the intellectually disabled. If he wants to come in, he should go find his former employer. Who else? No, he won't do. He's already been arrested? Then let the police put the evidence back and find that guy named Brock. He'll understand. When Schiller finished his work, he looked up and saw Bruce staring at him with a complex look in his eyes. A mixture of shock, how could this be? And disdain, just as I thought. Don't look at me. The hospital is running smoothly, isn't it? But Bruce opened his mouth, wanting to question Schiller, but for a moment he didn't know where to begin. I did a deal with Falcone. He manipulated the black gloves to provoke some lucrative gangs, then had his police chief arrest and try people. I gave them mental illness certificates to get them hospitalized. As for what happens next, that depends on whether their boss or their enemy pays more. Bruce stared at Schiller, who shrugged and said, "What? You find it unbelievable? Or do you really think I'm a good guy like Harvey? What makes you think that?" Bruce was speechless. Over the next few days, Bruce watched as Schiller, unable to defeat the enemy, not joined, but creatively created a new Gotham-style industrial chain out of thin air. His good professor merged into Gotham at lightning speed, without looking back and leaving everyone else in the dust, and even surpassed his teacher. But Bruce couldn't say anything yet. In this perfect Gotham industry chain, only the gangsters suffered. In terms of the outcome, the gangs were swindled out of money, Arkham Asylum quickly established order, the medical staff were safe, and the gang members in the hospital were incredibly well behaved. When Bruce went to check on the patients, he found that the gang leaders would even thank him inexplicably. They thought Bruce was a doctor who could prescribe painkillers for them. Several gang leaders, seeing his close relationship with Schiller, even offered him cigars every day to curry favor, hoping Schiller would loosen his grip so they could bring their connections in. Once, Bruce went with Schiller to see a patient. During a break, he overheard the mob bosses next door chatting. Colt is a bad boy, a complete bastard. He brought in absinthe himself and had another store smashed up, all to monopolize the liquor business here. He got into a fight with those twins. If you ask me, he did a very efficient job. After all, it was a big business worth millions of dollars. Are there really that many? That guy downstairs with the red hat, he makes 20,000 yuan a week selling cigarettes here. Who here doesn't smoke? Who doesn't smoke cigars? He can get good stuff from the docks, and people even come here specifically to get into this smuggling route. Room 2 also made a fortune. Who knows, he had a stroke of luck and got in touch with the Godfather. Next quarter, he'll be opening another restaurant. When the nurse comes over, put out all your cigarettes. Be careful not to anger those girls. They're all Black Widows under Madame Red Peach's command. The things Bruce witnessed in this hospital over the past few days left him with an extremely complex and conflicted feeling. Bruce wondered what he would do in his place. He thought for a long time, then admitted that he couldn't come up with a more efficient or honorable solution. One evening, Schiller was in a hospital room, saying to a woman who had no legs, "Not bad. The medication is already taking effect. The state of agitation will soon disappear." The woman lay on the bed, calm, or perhaps somewhat numb, as if she couldn't hear Schiller speaking. But Schiller continued, "There have been quite a few cases lately, but it's all right. The psychological treatment is almost over." His voice is perfect for a night like this, always carrying a calm power. Schiller turned around and found Batman standing behind him. Batman said in a deep voice, "How did she end up here? You cured this beggar's physical problems and performed the amputation surgery, but she has some congenital mental issues and was admitted here earlier." Schiller glanced at Batman, whose lips were always turned down. Compared to the daytime, he always seemed cold and sharp, making him unapproachable. "You seem surprised. What? You don't think I'm only good at colluding with gangsters, do you? What makes you think that?" Batman remained silent, and Schiller ignored him, turning around to lower the headboard of the woman's bed and then pulling the sheets back up. Schiller didn't look at Batman, but asked to himself, "Are you feeling disappointed? For this ungrateful city, for those who don't deserve to be saved, and who won't let you save anyone. Do you think Batlion made the right decision?" Batman's deep voice echoed in the hospital room. Schiller paused for a moment, then said, "Don't be disappointed. A black sun is still a sun. Bats may not light lamps, but the light they emit in the darkness is still a light." The cold light shone on the hospital's pristine white sheets. Schiller bent down and smoothed the sheets at the corner of the bed. Outside the window, Gotham's night was still dimly lit. Schiller straightened up and turned to look out the window. Batman saw that Schiller was backlit, and the moonlight cast a long shadow behind him. Batman looked up and saw his shadow on most of the wall and ceiling. A black bat with pointed ears. Bats don't light lamps. They don't even have a lamp to light their own way. There has never been a single lamp lit for them in the world. Not even a lone firefly for many years. But now, this bat has decided to learn how to light lamps. For the dark night here. For this hopeless city. Batman also looked out the window at the few, almost invisible lights in the pitch black. He thought, if one day the sun will never rise again in this absurd city, at least on the eve of the apocalypse, in this cold night with its dim lights, there is still the light he lit. A lamp that's useless whether it's lit or not. A bat lit the lamp.